Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male and female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. Episode 24. Can't believe we're here, but here we are. Second episode of 2023, and we are rolling right along as we talk today about variability in training. What is it? How to implement it? We'll discuss all of those points here today. All right. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. All right, let me bring in friend and co-host. Couldn't do the show without her. Softball national champion at the University of Alabama, current day renowned coach, Cassie Reilly-Boccia.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Excited for this. This is like my favorite thing to do in coaching. So definitely
Training
excited for it.
variability. Yeah, so that's your favorite thing to do in coaching. So you're a
One
hitting
of.
expert, one of the favorite things, training variability. Well, there's so many ways you can go about this, right? Variability in training. What is it? How to implement it? We'll discuss here today. By the way, great response. We had a great response on last week's episode, The Four Pillars of Hitting. I posted that episode on the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast YouTube page as well. And we had somebody, a gentleman, I don't remember his name, comment on the episode, and he watched it and said that our pointers and our instruction made him better apparently in his winter men's league or something. So at least
There
we're
you go.
helping people out there. So if you
There you
haven't
go.
checked out that episode from last week, episode 20, that was episode 23 of Cross Functionality, please do so. This week, by the way, Cass on the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast, Jake and I, and subscribe to that podcast as well. Every Monday, new episodes, 9 a.m. But we talked about bat speed and bat quickness this week. That was our main topic. And I want to get your opinion on that. For me personally, I'm more in bat quickness camp. I look at it like foot speed. Like if somebody, for example, baseball or softball player, if they lose foot speed, they'll slow down a little bit, but they'll still ultimately be fast in the end, like a la Trey Turner. But then when you look at Vladimir Guerrero Jr., for example, he doesn't have the greatest foot speed. Right now, he's very fast, but when he slows down, he's really going to slow down as a runner, and he's going to be a below average runner. Just my opinion on it. Now, I look at it from a hitting standpoint. If a hitter swings the bat really fast, that's all well and good. But as soon as they lose that bat quickness, meaning that getting the hands to the point of contact from the launch position and getting on plane as quickly as possible, it's done. At that point, it's pretty much over because Albert Pujols back in his day used to swing the bat 77 miles per hour, bat speed, but he had the bat quickness and he still was producing extra base hits, home runs, MVP type numbers every single year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know what? So I'm always like, I love metrics. That's my favorite thing. However, I'm very curious what the metrics are off of live pitching. So if someone can produce that miles per hour just because, or can they produce it off of live pitching? So
Right.
I actually did my thesis on this. What is the comparison between, or what is the relationship between bat velocity, bat quickness in game for college softball players? And we had a bunch of singles hitters, high average singles hitters that were really, really quick to the ball that didn't maybe produce a ton of velocity. And we're really looking at like instantaneous velocity at contact. And then we had all these other hitters who had higher strikeout numbers, but slugging percentage was very high. They were getting big numbers, huge velocity, but it was taking them longer to do it. So you're thinking like, this is a car that can go fast. It just takes them a while to produce that speed, right?
Yeah.
And then we had this like outlier bottom right corner. That's like the car that, hey, we're going fast and we're figuring out a way to get our body to do it in a really short period of time. And I remember looking at this research and being like, I really, really hope this hitter turns out to be doing well. And I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but that hitter ended up batting leadoff for the USA Olympic team this past year. And so she turned out all right, so there is a relationship too. Obviously you want to try to have that positive relationship of both where you're not sacrificing too much one for the other, or you find out where your strength is. If you're a hitter who's like maybe a little bit smaller and you need to just work on your contact, you're going to work on getting quicker to the ball. Or if you're a hitter who, hey, I feel like I'm quick, but I'm barely getting, when I get barrel on it, it's weak fly balls, then you maybe work on your speed. So I always think it depends. But you need the combination of it in your lineup to be successful. You can't just have all bat speed guys versus bat quickness guys. And I think the combo is the well-rounded lineup approach that you go for.
So what do you think about this combo? I love this one. Bat quickness combined with the bat whip. Maybe not so much bat speed, because again, you can
like
swing
how
the
it
bat
lags,
fast.
how it lags.
Correct. And you can just see it in a guy or gal when they whip the bat through. It's a pretty thing.
It's usually an indication that they are able to produce that at low effort on their part, right?
Right.
So they are essentially producing high speed at 80% effort, which should entail very high accuracy for them. The same thing when you see somebody throwing, it's like, wow, they're not even trying that hard, their hardest, and they're producing high velocities, which means they're going to be pinpoint accuracy. It's not just, hey, I'm going to throw it as hard as I could, and I don't care where the ball goes, you know?
Right.
So that's what I think is so impressive about that whip, where it's, hey, everything is sequenced up, their accuracy is high, and they're producing tremendous velocity.
Well, I'm glad you brought up pitching too, because that's where those metrics come in, and you can kind of see and understand more about where the ball's going, what you're doing with the ball, how you're cutting the ball, how it's coming off your fingertips. So that allows you to have that control, have that command that you want. And now you understand why somebody may not have to go full bore, full effort to throw as hard as they possibly want to.
Right. Yeah. So it is, I mean, shoot, there's so many parallels you could pull from so many different things. I mean, even runners, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that efficiency piece where you're like, okay, I need to run fast, but I can't burn myself out. I need to be, it's finding that balance. And to be honest, if I could sum up most of my Sundays, most of like the third game of the series, it was my body didn't feel that great, but I was still trying to find where's my efficiency so I don't feel like I'm over swinging. Where am I at? Am I really sore and tired? Am I swinging too slow? That was, I think, the hardest to feel when I was fatigued.
All right. So again, great topic this week with the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast. Jake Epstein and I. That will be episode 127. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. I say that a lot, but please do, and subscribe to the YouTube page as well, the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast. See, you're laughing because you know it's true. I say it all the time.
No, it's good.
Episode 127 this week. Again, that episode dropped on Monday, but you can listen to it at any time. All right, cross functionality here. Let's get into our main topic today, episode 24, training variability. What is it? How to implement it? Now, I got this, Cass, according to perceptionaction.com. The purpose of adding variability right at the start of training is to encourage exploration of the perceptual motor landscape so that the performer will educate their attention to the specifying information, and the system will be able to self-assemble in coordination and solutions. So through all that word salad, thank you, Perception Action. I'm going to ask you your definition. That is their definition of training variability and when to implement it. What is your definition of training variability?
So I can do it as a hitting coach, not letting the hitter know speed and location. That's like, if I'm going to make it super, super, super simple. Now, if I'm going to do it as just a coach in general, is I do not want the athlete to be able to ever press autopilot and get through their session. Of course, we're going to have some things that we're going to need to harp on and like maybe stay the same, but I don't ever want them to not be cognitively, physically, emotionally stimulated with changes and challenges in order to have a really productive workout. So if we do the exact same thing every single Monday and we don't change anything, it's the same warm up and the same this, and about 15 minutes through we do this, they're going to be able to kind of just go through autopilot. But if I start to switch things up on them and challenge them, all of a sudden they have to tap into different hormonal responses, different cognitive responses in order to be focused and attentive and successful in that session. So if I'm doing that as a coach, if I'm applying these little stimuli here and there to tweak their training session, that's how variability is going to end up changing them for the better.
So I look at it too from a training standpoint, a weightlifting standpoint. There are trainers out there that say if you're going on a weight program, you should do it for at least 8 to 12 weeks. Allow your body to adapt to that, but don't overdo it. Right. And again, to your point, doing the same thing over and over again, eventually, right, your body is going to hit a plateau, whether it comes to weight training or if it's hitting.
Absolutely. That plateau is it's not wrong, and it's not a bad thing that like you've hit it. It's another clue as to this is the different direction we have to go in now, or here's another direction we have to go. And I think if you're a parent or a coach or you have a really young athlete in your life, there's a foundational motor learning base that has really not been developed, and you can't apply a ton of variability training to the younger athlete because you can almost hurt them then, right? You need to, once this is what we're discussing, once that foundational base has been passed and we're really training now. We're really designing training programs. So that's when you're looking at it for weightlifting, hitting, even cognitively. You can have a cognitive plateau when you're supposed to be having a weightlifting rise, and that might even be a an issue too. The athlete is bored, right? So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have
I've
to
been
look
there.
into that
I
as well.
understand completely. Yeah.
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 So those are just all considerations we're trying to look at for that athlete to say, okay, when are we gonna add this piece in that really, really challenges them, where they have to be on their toes, they don't know what's coming next. I
Yeah.
think every now and then that's huge.
That's a great segue. That was going to be my next question. When is the proper time really to introduce training variability when it comes to sports specific? So we won't talk weightlifting now. We're talking sports specific, baseball, softball. When's the best time?
Sure. I work in small group settings, right? So I don't have a team that comes in. I don't coach a team, so this is a little bit different. But usually, that first time a female comes in, we're a male dominated facility. They're kind of a little wide eyed. They're looking around. I'm not going to all of a sudden be like, all right, listen, we're going to go do some really, really crazy things. I'm going to add a bunch of variability. I always, I explain what's going on. We make sure we get past that initial anxieties, and then I'm gauging their comfort. And what I say is that comfort and growth cannot exist at the same table. They can't
Mhm.
have dinner together. They don't get along. So if you find yourself comfortable for the first 45 minutes, we
Yeah.
did something wrong. We didn't get better that day. We didn't grow that day. And my job is to make you as uncomfortable as we can tolerate. So seeing the athlete, getting to know the athlete. Hey, you're being really successful in this drill. Great. I'm going to try to make you fail a little bit more now. I'm going to try to add in something a little different that you don't know what's coming. So whereas maybe the variability was just changing the angle in which I was throwing front toss, and now that's become easy for them. Cool. Now I'm going to change the speed up with that angle. Now I'm going to change, there's, you just start to add different layers. And what's helpful is when you have this Rolodex of so many different, you can call them drills, or you can just call them different stimuluses that you add to the athlete, right?
Right.
When you have this Rolodex, then it becomes very easy to apply this layer, do this layer. That was too much. I need to bring it back a little bit. It's like
All
the
right. So,
Goldilocks method.
the Goldilocks method.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I
Just
like that.
not too much, not too little, just right. You're trying to find the just right.
Okay. I was going to say, does this have something to do with the long hair and the,
No.
yeah. Okay. The Goldilocks method. That's pretty good. Do you have that written down on on one of your whiteboards at work?
I don't think. No, I just read that somewhere and I was like, that's funny
Should
because I
I,
really
should
thought
I,
there was going to be
I,
something.
I think maybe this episode should be named the Goldilocks method.
There you go.
Yeah, change things up a little bit.
Mhm.
Subscribe to our YouTube page as well, Softball Strength Academy, for video episodes of the show. So getting into the principle of training variability, when you were with the Pirates there for a brief time back in the fall, and you had that weekend in Bradenton, Florida with the Pirates, working with some people from that organization, they talked about random limited knowledge of speed and location when it comes to training variability as it pertains to hitting,
Mhm.
right?
Yep, and what? So much so that this was one of the pillars written on their board. They
Mhm.
had pillars of coaching successful athletes, and this was it. And what they had talked about is so many times in hitting lessons and pitching lessons, or just as a hitter grows up, it's like, all right, hey, we're going round one, opposite field. You're getting outside pitches. Boom, boom,
Mhm.
boom, boom, boom. Move on to the next thing. And instead, it's great. You have all this skill. Let's now test it when you have no idea where the pitch is going, or you have no idea what speed it is. And that's obviously as close to a game like scenario as possible. We can know the range of what a pitcher's throwing, but we don't know what if they're throwing an off speed, a hard pitch, whatever it may be. So when we can challenge that athlete with that type of variability where they don't know that speed, the swing's not going to look as pretty, but we're going
Yeah.
to now actually start to tap into a deeper level of like, okay, great. You have that motor learning for the swing. What does your motor learning look like for adjustability? How well can we intentionally train that adjustability? So, I mean, if that is truly the mark of a consistent hitter, is how well they can have in-flight adjustments, pitch to pitch adjustments, and whatever that may be, then all of a sudden it makes a lot more sense to do that type of variability training than it does to, set a ball up on a tee and hit balls up the middle then.
So then, are you in the camp of chaos training? Because some people like it, some coaches, other coaches, not so much. They like to slow things down and do training variability differently. What's your thoughts? Because that seems to be a big topic, chaos training when it comes to hitting, and really started in 2019. And
Mhm.
it's been a debated topic now into 2023.
I really do think there's a place for it. I think it
Mhm.
needs to be all the time? Probably not. Is there a time
Right.
to slow things down, reset? 100%. And that's just getting to know your team. It's never going to be this perfect formula where it's like weeks 1, 2, 3, you're going to do this and then you'll implement this. It's looking at, like I said, it's looking at your team and starting to be like, okay, they're ready for this challenge. They're in a good place for this challenge. We're going to now apply it. And chaos training could be something as simple as during defensive work. It's
Mhm.
not just hey, third base, you're getting a ball going to first and we're going to go around the horn. It's, I'm going to hit it anywhere, anytime, be on your toes. That could be just that little bit of variability. So you can apply that to a team setting. We had a scenario where we had front toss on an angle, and we didn't know if typically that angle would just be, oh, we're practicing the inside pitch. And then all of a sudden it turned into, no, I'm going to throw inside and outside pitches. Okay. And then it turned into, I'm going to throw inside, outside, fast and slow. And then it turned into, I'm going to put a live pitcher at that angle. You know what I mean? It's like, you're just applying the variable. So but again, you don't start with the craziest variable. You gauge how the hitter does with success rate. If this hitter is at a 10% success rate, the variability is probably too difficult at that time, and you got to scale back.
I want to give you props, by the way, on your Instagram at Coach_Cassie RB, and of course, Coach Cassie RB on Twitter. But on your Instagram page, you did a mechanical breakdown, which is very cool. So if people haven't seen that, go check it out. Doing a live mechanical breakdown of a hitter. Seems like you really enjoyed it.
You know what? We had a first round of some teams come in. We had 7 different teams come in, and that's usually just there's so many questions they have because they've been taught in so many different ways. And you really are just trying to say, this is what we need to get done in 40 minutes. This is like what we can look for, overarching principles. And we can talk about mechanics till we're blue in the face. There's not going to be one thing that says, hey, this is going to be perfect every single time, because that just doesn't exist. But it's neat to kind of go over these overarching principles so that coaches can have them in their back pocket. And, athletes can kind of maybe understand them too. But yeah, I tried to keep it under 20 minutes, and you guys can go and check it out.
Yeah, at Coach_Cassie RB on Instagram for that. All right, practice makes permanent when it comes to training variability. How does training variability help with skill acquisition like that? Because you hear that saying all the time, practice makes permanent. So how does it help with skill acquisition?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's it's not practice makes perfect, right? Because we practice the wrong thing over and over again.
Did I say perfect? I meant permanent. I'm sorry.
No, you said permanent. You said permanent.
Okay.
I just mean, usually people say practice makes perfect.
Okay.
And that's so I appreciate you saying permanent, because that's exactly what it is. What you're practicing is what's going to end up being applied to your motor pathway. And, I always give the running back example in football. If you have a running back drill and you say, okay, we're doing this drill where you cut right, cut left, run straight, it's great. They'll get really good at doing that specific drill over and over again, but they're never going to get good at actually reading a defense and reacting to a defense. So there is the way your motor skill that you want to develop, right? You're challenging them in that appropriate way. These hormones that get elicited, it's just all of a sudden, whatever you're trying to work on, whatever you've been tweaking, then you then apply this variability training, and the athlete is having to create these pathways from their brain to their body on their own, based on their environment, based on these changes. All of a sudden they stick and they apply so much faster at such a more intelligent, not even rate, but just an intelligent way. They're applying their motor skill. They're not just swinging to have a good swing. They're swinging with intent to drive the ball opposite field off of a pitch that they've seen. Like I said, it applies such a better game-like mentality for that hitter, in addition to a game-like pathway for that motor learning to be implemented.
Yeah, and as you've talked about, continuously stimulating that athlete, right, and challenging that athlete to different things so they don't go right on into autopilot.
Yeah, I do think that's kind of the hardest part, because I think athletes are trying to find efficiency in their life because they have so much in their life. If you talk to any high school athlete, and granted, I know I work with a lot of athletes either in the city, right outside of New York City. It is a fast-paced way of life. They're trying to cram their schedule, this, and this. They have homework. Like, their body is searching, or their mind is searching for efficiency, because they have so much going on. They can't be 100% fully present in every single thing they do, or they'll burn out. So when they go to do homework, they're trying to create a system for how to do homework. When they're in class, they're trying to create a system for how they take notes. And what I'm trying to do is, when they get into a training session, I want to cut them of that systematic approach of like, all right, well, I'm just going to go through this. How many of this? How many swings should I do of this? I'm like, until you feel like you can't do it wrong. Like, I don't want to give you number 15 because they'll just check a box, boom, 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 15, move on. I want them to actually feel what's going on in their body. I want them to actually know what it's like to do it right, to do it wrong, how to correct back, and to get them present in that state of flow. Variability is just a really great way to cut them of that, because they can't
I like
go that autopilot.
I liked your football analogy, by the way. Who was your favorite running back growing up? Did you have one?
I'm blanking on his name. It was the guy with the Colts who played with Peyton forever. I had him in Manning.
Oh, Edrin James.
What's up?
Edrin James.
Yes, thank you. I had him in Madden. Yes, that was my guy.
You played Madden too.
I did.
My favorite quarterback growing up, for those who don't know, was Troy Aikman. I saw him
Mm.
play in 1995 for the first time on national television, and I was watching the game with my dad, and I loved the way he would throw the ball. And that was it. That was the only thing. I used to love his delivery, and I said that's my favorite player. But my dad is a Giants fan, for those who don't know, and I couldn't tell him that for years. I didn't tell my father that until I was like 29. Like, oh, by the way, Aikman was my favorite quarterback growing up. It's all right. The Giants haven't made the playoffs since like 1993.
No, they're
so
in this year though. How about it?
I know they're in this. I know. I think I'm talking to a Giants fan, aren't I?
You know what? I am surrounded by Giants fans. I am not a big NFL fan. My poor dad is a Jets and Mets fan, so I always sympathize with him.
Gentleman.
I know he hasn't had a win in a long time.
Although he's got Moneybag Stevie over there.
Yeah, Mets are piling it on.
So anyway, also, too, I want to remind everybody to email us your questions about anything we're talking about today, previous episodes, whatever we've talked about in the past, Jimbo podcast, hitting questions, throwing questions, personal questions. We'll filter those through as well. Jimbo podcast 21 at gmail.com. How does training variability help younger athletes? I had this problem. I'm glad I brought up my my youth here about loving Troy Aikman. Still like him, by the way. I had trouble when I was a kid, Cass, with my fine motor skills. I was very coordinated, but I had trouble with like the fine motor skills, right? You know what I'm talking about, doing those simple things around the house, like, I don't know, pulling off the tinfoil to cover things, right? Pulling it off at a nice straight line. I had trouble doing that. I had trouble drawing when I was 4 or 5 years old. I had trouble cutting things straight when I was 4 or 5 years old. It's one of the reasons that I had to get held back a year in school. And instead of going off to first grade, I went to pre-first. And I tell people that, and they look at me like, what is pre-first? It's the grade between kindergarten and first grade. And no, it's probably not around anymore. So how does variability help younger athletes to develop their fine motor skills?
You know what? I think it's one, it depends. So if there is a detriment to fine motor skills, that's a whole nother realm of therapy and tactics that gets to be used. If it's just developing skills in general, I mean, it's the same theme that we've been talking about. You challenge that athlete until their success rate is a little bit lower. And then when it's too low, it's almost like, oh, that's too low. We're going to pull back the challenge a little bit, because you don't want them to get so frustrated. I'm sure I was a lefty trying to cut with scissors, and I used to get frustrated all the time. I had no success rate whatsoever.
I cut with my right hand. Yeah.
I try to learn. Right. So then all of a sudden going from your left hand to try to learn how to cut with your right hand. Right. So you can't add all this variability training when something is super challenging to someone, because again, you're trying to gauge how much frustration can they tolerate, or really how much challenge can they tolerate until it turns into frustration. Because once you get that frustration, you've lost them, right? Can you have either A, provide them some tools to turn it into determination, or B, can you pull back some of that challenge a little bit to make it less at a less failure rate? So again, not to hop out of my lane and go into like how to train, or how to like administer therapy for someone struggling with fine motor skills, but you're just gauging. Even, I have a stepson who's 6 years old now and going through kindergarten, and it's very neat to see how, his days are structured to a point, right? He knows when there's certain things, but there's variability within that structure. And I think the teacher does a phenomenal job with it. And I see it then come at home too with, hey, there's a certain structure that provides, very good clarity and expectation for him. But adding some variability, it almost like stimulates him. It's a little different. He doesn't get bored. And you start to see learning how to read, learning how to do all these things. It's a very neat process to watch how someone learns when they're young, and then say, okay, well, this is also the same way as someone learns when they're 14, 15, 16, But
you made a great point in there. You said the key word, bored, right? It's the same thing with athletes. You don't want them to get bored, right? It's a simple process, because then at that point, if they get bored, it's time to really change things up, because they're not going to get anything out. I mean, if you hit, I get it, you hit 100 balls the other way, you get 100 outside pitches and you keep going the other way, but say 75% of those are line drives or hard hit balls. We have the data to measure that now. Well, maybe it's time to move on at that point to the next step in your training variability.
100%. Yeah. And I think what's difficult too is the attention span of humans in general today, it's not even, oh, young athletes don't have attention span. Adults have started to lose it too. It is just based on how fast technology has made our life. The idea of media, people don't typically sit down and watch television anymore. We scroll for 10-second bits. So like all of our collective attention spans are different. And as a coach, like, you know, if I'm an older coach, I'm looking at a young athlete and I have to understand she's not going to sit off of a tee and hit 10 balls in a row and be able to stay focused. That's like going to be very rare now. So I need to try to put myself in her shoes and not, you know, try to jam a square peg into a round hole and say, you have to do this because this is how we did it. We have to gauge the attention span of athletes or just of people in general that we're working with, because it is very different now.
Yeah. Final point of today's episode, again, episode 24. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Variability in training. What is it? How to implement it. The final main point of today's show. Why do you implement training variability? The main message of that. What do we need to get across about training variability today, and why to implement it?
It is going to be one of the best ways for an athlete to improve their skill, which is why they're working with a coach. So we're going to accept that the research has told us that, and that we're going to find ways to do it. And then 2, it is going to just help that athlete enjoy their training so much more. So it's, if an athlete's not enjoying it and they're getting overly frustrated, we varied it too much to the point where we don't even have even a little bit of structure or a little bit of success, because they need to have small wins with that structure and success rate.
Sure.
But we're trying to find the sweet spot of variability, trying to find the sweet spot of that challenge so that we can make our athletes better than they were the day before.
Perfect. Great episode this week. Great job. Episode 24. Next week, episode 25, talking about implicit and explicit training tactics. I'm really looking forward to that. What is the meaning? Let's just give a little preview, a little teaser, if you will. Implicit, explicit training tactics. What will you and I be discussing next week?
Sure. So if we have a hitter who is figuring out how to accomplish a drill with the appropriate constraints, they are participating in implicit learning style. If they have a coach who is telling them exactly what to do, how to do it, where to put their elbow, their hand, their this and that, they are participating in an explicit learning style. And one is better than the other. And we can talk about that next week if you can't guess already.
Teaser. For those who don't know, if you haven't figured it out, it's a teaser. That's what's called in the business, a teaser for next week. Episode 25. And again, you do a great job filtering and condensing, consolidating your information to the point where it is so easy on Instagram and Twitter to decipher through and to learn something. So again, go to Cassie's Twitter and Instagram at Coach_Cassie RB, and we'll have clips, of course, on our Instagrams from previous episodes. Last week, if you missed last week's episode, what was it? Episode 23. I'm losing count already.
I know.
Imagine when it's episode
right along.
like 125. I'm going to lose count at that point. All right. Next week, join us. Implicit versus explicit training tactics. We'll talk about that next week. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you then. Have a great week.
Thanks, Jim.